After Goro's powerful, gruff voice reverberated around the war council room, you honestly believed they would give up? After all we've thrown at them, his 4 eyes are narrowing in shock. You don't understand, people. As the assembled commanders of the United Species Alliance gazed at the holographic war map, they saw that their initial confidence had been shaken and that what had seemed like an easy campaign had turned into an endless nightmare as the red zone of human territory continued to spread, engulfing whole systems. They are not like us. No species battles endlessly without running itself ragged. They don't give up and don't give up. Every species has a threshold, and Commander ROK interposed his people, the Valani, who had perfected strategic retreats over millennia of combat. A couple of the smaller commanders flinched as Gorik smacked his fist on the table. They don't have one, so they strike back harder. You wreck their ships, they build larger ones, you destroy a planet, and they don't cry, they become upset. Rallo's calculating, cold mentality couldn't comprehend that even people have limitations and that the military is limitless. How can they continue to go ahead when we have devastated their resource worlds and crippled their supply chains? Gorik leaned back, his reptilian features displaying a nasty sneer. At the Siege of Varth, I engaged them in close combat. We broke through their front lines and believed we had won, but when we broke into their command center, their soldiers fought as if nothing had happened. We killed half of their officers, and the rest simply adjusted. It seemed as though we hadn't even injured them. They adapt because they are afraid of losing. ROK said, it's just survival. The room was quiet as each commander considered the ramifications, and Goro's smile turned into a more ferocious dread number that you don't comprehend at all. They thrive in it, not afraid of losing. We had never seen anything like them, so it was unsettling to think that people accepted failure as a natural part of who they were rather than just resisting it. Gorik's voice was low, but he was carrying the weight of innumerable battles. They fight wars as if it were second nature, adapting, evolving, and striking back harder no matter how many people are killed. I have witnessed their soldiers fight even when every tactical advantage is against them. For them, it's about enduring, not about winning. In a display of doubt, ROK flipped his antenna, but for what purpose? Once everyone else was dead, Goro's sneer vanished and was replaced with a terrifying certainty. In an attempt to find support for his position, ROK looked around the room, but all he saw were faces full of the same fear he tried to conceal. This war was no longer about logistics or battle strategy. Humans had turned it into something primal, for which none of them were ready. Eventually, another commander muttered more to himself than anyone else, possibly in reference to Gorik, but until they did, they would keep coming, and every time we killed one, 5 more would take their place. Are you saying that we should alter our strategy before it's too late? Ravelo spit the word surrender like venom. I'm suggesting survival, Gorik said, shaking his head. With the weight of Goro's remarks weighing on every one of them, the room was alive with whispers. Could they really survive against an adversary like this one that didn't appear to comprehend or care about its own losses? We must keep in mind that no species, no matter how hardy, can outlast a coalition of united troops. All we need is a tactic that demoralizes them. Ralpho rose higher, attempting to reclaim control of the argument. Their morale is low. If you believe that they care about morale after seeing their homes fall to ashes, you're mistaken. Gorik snapped because they fight because they're human, not because they fight for honor or glory. If what you say is true, then they're nothing more than savage beasts. There must be a way to savage, Ratch waved it dismissively. Gorik cut him off with a low growl, saying, they're dangerous because they're smarter than that. They don't care how many planets we destroy or how many people are killed, they just keep coming. When they run out of soldiers, they send civilians with makeshift weapons and suicidal tactics. You think we can outsmart that? We've tried everything, blockades, bombardments, cutting off their resources, and nothing has worked. ROK's jaw tightened, and the room became quiet once again. Gore's remarks created some space for discussion. He had witnessed it, while the others were still clinging to traditional methods that attempt to accommodate human resilience within the parameters of their familiar cosmos. With his eyes sweeping the ever-expanding human expansion, Gorik turned to the holographic map. Our ships are already overextended. And if we don't take action now, there won't be any more gatherings like this one. With his thoughts racing, ROK walked back and forth. If they won't stop, what can we do? Gorak stopped, then added quietly, we have to make them think we're not worth their time. Gorak didn't answer right away. His eyes clouded as he remembered the wars. ROK lifted an eyebrow and said, how exactly do you plan to convince a species that doesn't understand surrender to leave us alone? In order to combat the seemingly endless waves of human beings, we will need to provide them with an alternative. We must bring all animals together, not just to resist, but also to demonstrate to humans that we are too expensive to eradicate. After a little period of silence, ROK shook his head in a way that seemed desperate. It's Gorak, he said, but it's the only plan that gives us a chance. Instead of compromising with predators by displaying weakness, you help them realize that the search isn't worthwhile. ROK's eyes darted over the holographic map, each glowing red icon signifying a human fleet advancing deeper into their territories. He turned back to the map and watched as another human fleet passed through one of their blockade lines without slowing for the first time in the war. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but he started to realize that their enemy might not be as defeatable as they had always imagined. The Alliance's strategy was based on the idea that humans would crumble under the weight of overwhelming force and retreat once they saw the odds, but humans didn't care about the odds. ROK asked, still doubting Goro's plan to unite all the species and what hope the humans find us too costly to wipe out. Gorak crossed his arms, his reptilian features twitching in frustration. They don't fight like we do. They don't have a central government or an empire we can negotiate with. They're dispersed throughout their colonies, each more independent than the last. Their survival doesn't depend on a single leader or a planet. We must chop the beast's head off since there must be a core point of failure, ROK thought as he drew closer to the chart. The problem is that, unlike us, they don't need leadership. If you kill one general, 3 more take his place, and they're all equally capable. What's worse is that they don't even care about the same things we do. We value order, structure, and strategy, and instead seem to thrive in chaos. No species can survive without leadership. They thrive in disorder. Yeah, I have seen it. Rvox and Tenny twitched are still attempting to reconcile this with their concept of combat mayhem. They don't flinch when the battle plan fails. Instead, they adapt, as if they anticipate failure and prepare for it. Rallo stood erect, his posture rigid as he considered what he had said. He then turned to face the other council members, whose worried expressions were lit up by the glowing map. If they adjust to the changing situation, we create too many variables for even they to manage one of the younger commanders. A shrewd-looking Furin cocked his head, saying, you mean, they were overpowered by complexity? How not just complexity? Warming to the notion that deceit makes people believe they're winning leads them into traps. According to Rollo, they will ultimately run out of alternatives if we divide their troops along many fronts and give them too many issues to handle. There must be a breaking point for every species to exist. I'm telling you, I've seen them in action, Gorak grumbled. I don't believe they can deviate from our expectations. ROK disregarded him when he addressed the council, and we attacked them in unexpected ways. Guerrilla attacks on vital supply lines that destroy their colonies are pushed to the limit, their infrastructure is disrupted, their industries are targeted, and their food supplies are destroyed. Gorak shook his head, saying, you're assuming they need those things? Humans have fought in conditions that would break any of us. They're not relying on luxury or comfort. You destroy their supply line. They'll find another way. You take away their food. They'll eat whatever they can find. They don't need what we need. ROK gave him a stern look and said, no species is invincible. Gorak growled, I'm not saying they're invincible, I'm saying they're unpredictable. You're treating them like they're just another army, but they're not. They fight with their entire society, not just with guns or ships. Engineers become into strategists. The plan was sound on the surface, cutting off resources, disrupting infrastructure, and spreading chaos, but the problem wasn't the strategy, it was the humans themselves. They'll fight without technology if necessary. After a long pause, Gorak said, You think you can break them by taking away their tools, but that's not how they think. They've been surviving against impossible odds for as long as we've known them. They find ways to win. Farmers manufacture weapons. They don't need formal training. Every human is a potential threat, regardless of the role they play. What's your idea, then? ROK stopped pacing, his eyes displaying obvious displeasure. Gorak, you seem to believe that there is nothing we can do to stop them. Should we quit up? Goro maintained a steady stare. He crossed his arms, so we allowed them to take over the galaxy because they are too obstinate to stop them. I'm saying that we need to change the way we think about this war. Humans have been treating it like a series of battles, but to them, it isn't a series of conflicts to win, it's a way of life. That's the one thing they can't adjust to, Gorak remarked in a low voice. We make it so they can't fight the way they're used to, they thrive in chaos. ROK arched an eyebrow. We make this war predictable. Gorak acknowledged that people are adaptive because they anticipate problems. But what if everything goes according to plan and every assault turns out to be precisely what they anticipated? No shocks, no abrupt movements, and no mayhem. They anticipate uncertainty, so we give them the opposite. ROK scowled at the notion that it was out of the ordinary, but that's precisely what made it interesting. You suppose they'll falter if they can't depend on their flexibility? Gori shrugged. Although it is a hypothesis, we haven't tested it yet. The council murmured in agreement, cautious but intrigued, and ROK turned back to the map, his mind already calculating very well. ROK stood silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. If they continued fighting this war the same way, they would lose that much. It was obvious that humans were relentless, but even they had to have limits they hadn't yet found. Unwaveringly, we will force humans to fight on our terms and test their ability to adjust to a conflict without any shocks. Though his face showed lingering skepticism, Gorak nodded slowly. The proposal was audacious, but he had seen too much to put his faith in audacity alone. It was time to check whether they could manage predictability because, for the first time in weeks, ROK felt certain that they were finally gaining charge of the situation and that this conflict would no longer be conducted on human terms. Every move the Alliance made, every deployment, and every attack were flawlessly orchestrated and carried out without a hitch as the last fight for the Torvian system got underway. The combined fleets of more than a dozen species responded to human advancements with mechanical precision while moving in flawless coordination. ROK looked at Gorak, who stood silently next to him, his eyes narrowed as he studied the display. They were falling back. ROK watched from the command deck of his flagship as the holographic map unfolded before him, each human fleet marked in red being intercepted at precisely the right moment, the response fleets moving with a synchronization the humans could never match. Rallo noticed a tinge of contentment in his tone. The Gorak grunt, or they're shifting the Alliance. Countered before they could adjust, so there was no chaos for them to take advantage of, no unpredictability to turn to their advantage, and ROK ignored the comment for the first time since the start of this war. The Alliance had created a war where every action and every path was planned down to the smallest detail, Commander. Their primary fleet was retreating when one of the junior officers reported, "Should we pursue?" ROK nodded in agreement, but maintained the formation. He asked if everything went as planned, and the officer replied that human reinforcements had been stalled and couldn't breach our lines. The fleet surged forward in a wave of precision, maintaining their rigid formation even as the human ships started to fall back. Rock's heart pounded with excitement because this was how they would break the humans by making the war one they couldn't fight, with no unexpected twists or surprises, just constant, inevitable pressure until the humans cracked status on the secondary front. ROK grinned nicely this time, but as the fight went on, a persistent thought kept coming to him. It was too simple for a species that had made chaos into art, and the humans were reacting almost predictably. His thoughts were filled with words that predicted unpredictability, so we gave them the opposite. Now that they were finally winning, sir, and a fresh contact human fleet was discovered at coordinates 7129, Ralpho shook off the uncertainty because he couldn't afford to second-guess himself. "That's not possible," Ral said, narrowing his brows. His fleet was spread in a perfect arc, cutting off all possible entry points. "Where did the humans come from?" he questioned of the officer. "Unknown, sir." They simply seemed impossible. They must have been waiting for us to commit our troops, because ROK growled before he saw the red dots swarming on the map and converging on a single place behind their front line. Gorik whispered that they want for us to follow this pattern. With the Alliance locked into their ideal posture, the humans had discovered the one weakness in their fortifications and pulled back the left flank. ROK's heart fell. This wasn't a retreat, but a feeble one, and he ordered the lines to be reformed too late. Goro said somberly that they had already entered the human ships that were brutally efficient in attacking the Alliance's command ships and interfering with their meticulously planned. The humans moved with a speed and brutality that defied logic. As ROK muttered, "We had them. Every move they made was exactly what we expected. That's why they did it." Maneuvers. Ravak stared in terror as his neatly ordered fleets started to disintegrate, ships scrambling to react. They knew we were trying to control the battle, so they let us set the terms and then hit us where it hurt the most, Gore remarked quietly. With his thoughts racing, Ralvo tightened his hands, realizing that he had misjudged them. Instead of fighting the war on the Alliance's terms, the humans had adapted by giving the Alliance the impression that they were in control the entire time. They were positioning for this moment, waiting for the Alliance to become predictable. He gave the order, "Vote tight, we need to regroup," but it was too late. The human ships had pushed deeper, shattering the Alliance's lines, instead of retreating. As the human vessels navigated through the disarray of Alliance forces, aiming for important ships and command ERS with merciless precision, what had been a battle of precision turned into a slaughter. ROK watched helplessly as his fleets broke up, with every attempt to restore order being met with swift counterattacks. The humans weren't responding to the Alliance's strategies. Instead, they were destroying them piece by piece, turning predictability against us. They needed control, not pandemonium, Gorik said almost to himself. Every choice he made, every action he believed was forcing the humans into submission had only served to tighten the noose around his neck. "Sir," the officer said in a trembling voice, "we've lost the left and right flanks." Rock's chest tightened as the humans used their own strategy against them, luring them into a trap of their own making. In the midst of Central Command, Rallo's eyes are fixed on the map, his mind numb. How had it gotten to this point? The humans were supposed to crumble under the pressure of a battle they couldn't adapt to, but they hadn't, because this was how they adapted, the officer pressed. His voice was beginning to sound panicked. ROK shut his eyes. The reality of his defeat settling, and he had thought he could outthink them, control them, but the humans were never fighting the same war. They had turned the Alliance's greatest strength, its precision and order, into a weapon against itself. "We're finished," ROK whispered. Gorik nodded slowly, a dark, bitter smile on his face. "I tried to tell you, this is what they do." ROK felt a hollow emptiness in his chest as the map turned red, all of it, the entire fleet, the culmination of the Alliance's strength and unity, reduced to wreckage and fleeing ships they had lost, not because the humans were stronger or faster, but because the Alliance had never truly understood what they were fighting. Gorik stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the burning remnants of the fleet. "Humans don't just fight to win, ROK, they fight to end you, and if you don't understand that from the start, you've already lost." ROK stared at the smoldering map, his entire body trembling with disbelief. He had tried to control a war against an enemy that defied control. In the end, it hadn't mattered how perfect their strategy was. The humans had won the moment they made them think they were in control.